Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to story time, where we've been reading The Hobbit for about 2 weeks now, and we're coming to the end. We have tonight and tomorrow, and we're going to finish up. So, without further ado, we'll begin chapter 13, where we left off. The dragons and Bilbo had really pissed off Smaug, and Bilbo had led Smaug to believe he was a barrow rider. So Smaug had collapsed the side of the mountain on the secret entrance and trapped the dwarves inside the tunnel. And that is where we pick up at chapter 13, Not at Home. Now if you're new to our reading streams, we do this every night to end our stream. It's something I started doing about 2 weeks ago. And we'll see how it goes. Something I'm going to continue doing. So, hopefully you like it. In the meanwhile, the dwarves sat in darkness, and utter silence fell about them. Little they ate, and little they spoke. They could not count the passing time, and they scarcely dared to move, for the whisper of their voices echoed and rustled in the tunnel. If they dozed, they woke still to darkness and to silence going on unbroken. At last, after days and days of waiting, as it seemed, when they were becoming choked and dazed for want of air, they could bear it no longer. They would almost have welcomed sounds from below of the dragon's return. In the silence they feared some cunning devilry of his, but they could not sit there forever. Thorin spoke. "Let us try the door," he said. "I must feel the wind on my face soon, or die. I think I would rather be smashed by Smaug in the open than suffocate in here." So several of the dwarves got up and groped back to where the door had been, but they found that the upper end of the tunnel had been shattered and blocked with a broken rock. Neither key nor magic it had once obeyed would ever open that door again. "We are trapped," they groaned. "This is the end. We shall die here." But somehow, just when the dwarves were most despairing, Bilbo felt a strange lightening of heart, as if a heavy weight had gone from under his waistcoat. "Come, come," he said. "While there's life, there's hope, as my father used to say, and third time pays for all. I'm going down the tunnel once again. I've been that way twice, when I knew there was a dragon at the other end, so I will risk a third visit when I am no longer sure. Anyway, the only way out is down, and I think it is time you had better all come with me." In desperation, they agreed, and Thorin was the first to go forward by Bilbo's side. "Now do be careful," whispered the hobbit, "and as quiet as you can be. There may be no Smaug at the bottom, but then again there may be. Don't let us take any unnecessary risks." Down, down they went. The dwarves could not, of course, compare with the hobbit in real stealth, and they made a deal of puffing and shuffling, with echoes magnified alarmingly. But although every now and again Bilbo in fear stopped and listened, not a sound stirred below. Near the bottom, as well as he could judge, Bilbo slipped on his ring and went around. But he did not need it. The darkness was complete, and they were all invisible, ring or no ring. In fact, so black was it that the hobbit came to the opening unexpectedly, put his hand on air, stumbled forward, and rolled headlong into the hall. There he lay face downwards on the floor and did not dare to get up or hardly even breathe. But nothing moved. There was not a gleam of light, unless, as it seemed to him, when at last he slowly raised his head, there was a pale white glint above him and far off in the gloom. But certainly it was not a spark of dragon fire, though the worm stench was heavy in the place and the taste of vapor was on his tongue. At length Mr. Baggins could bear it no longer. "Confound you, Smaug, you worm!" he squeaked aloud. "Stop playing hide and seek. Give me a light and then eat me if you can catch me." Faint echoes ran around the unseen hall, but there was no answer. Bilbo got up and found he did not know in what direction to turn. "Now I wonder what on earth Smaug is playing at," he said. "He is not at home today, or tonight, or whatever time it is, I do believe. If Thorin and Gloin have not lost their tinder boxes, perhaps we can make a little light and have a look around before any luck turns." "Light!" he cried. "Can anybody make a light?" The dwarves, of course, were very alarmed when Bilbo fell forward down the step with a bump into the hall, and they sat huddled just where he had left them at the end of the tunnel. "Shh! Shh!" they hissed when they heard his voice, and though that helped the hobbit to find out where they were, it was some time before he could get anything else out of them. But in the end, when Bilbo actually began to stamp on the floor and scream out, "Light!" at the top of his shrill voice, Thorin gave way, and Oin and Gloin were sent back up to the bundles at the top of the tunnel. After a while, a twinkling gleam showed them returning, Oin with a small pine torch alight in his hand, and Gloin with a bundle of others under his arm. Quickly Bilbo trotted to the door and took the torch, but he could not persuade the dwarves to light the others, or to come and join him yet. As Thorin carefully explained, Mr. Baggins was still officially their expert burglar and investigator. If he liked to risk a light, that was his affair. They would wait in the tunnel for his report, so they sat near the door and watched. They saw the little dark shape of the hobbit start across the floor holding his tiny light aloft. Every now and again, while he was still near enough, they caught a glint and a tinkle as he stumbled on some golden thing. The light grew smaller as he wandered away into the vast hall, and it began to rise, dancing into the air. Bilbo was climbing the great mound of treasure. Soon he stood upon the top and still went on. Then they saw him halt and stoop for a moment, and they did not know the reason. It was the Arkenstone, the heart of the mountain. So Bilbo guessed from Thorin's description, but indeed there could be no two such gems, even in so marvelous a hoard, even in all the world. Ever as he climbed, the same white gleam had shone before him, and drawn his feet towards it. Slowly it grew to a little globe of pallid light. Now as he came near, it was tinged with a flickering sparkle of many colors at the surface, reflected and splintered from the wavering light of his torch. At last he looked down upon it and caught his breath. The great jewel shone before his feet of its own inner light, and yet, cut and fashioned by the dwarves, who had dug it from the heart of the mountain long ago, it took all light that fell upon it and changed it into 10,000 sparks of white radiance, shot with glints of the rainbow. Suddenly, Bilbo's arm went towards it, drawn by its enchantment. His small hand would not close about it, for it was a large and heavy gem, but he lifted it, shut his eyes, and put it in his deepest pocket. "Now I am a burglar indeed," thought he, "but I suppose I must tell the dwarves about it, sometime. They did say I could pick and choose my own share, and I think I would choose this if they took all the rest." All the same, he had an uncomfortable feeling that the picking and choosing had not really been meant to include this marvelous gem, and that trouble would yet come of it. Now he went on again. Down the other side of the great mound he climbed, and the spark of his torch vanished from the sight of the watching dwarves. But soon they saw it far away in the distance again. Bilbo was crossing the floor of the hall. He went on until he came to the great doors at the further side, and there a draught of air refreshed him, but it almost puffed out his light. He peeped timidly through and caught a glimpse of great passages, and of the dim beginnings of wide stairs going up into the gloom. And still there was no sight nor sound of Smaug. He was just going to turn and go back when a black shape swooped at him and brushed his face. He squeaked and started, stumbled backwards, and fell. His torch dropped head downwards and went out. "Only a bat, I suppose, and hope," he said miserably. "Now what am I to do? Which is east, south, north, or west?" "Thorin! Balin! Oin! Gloin! Fili! Kili!" he cried as loud as he could. It seemed a thin little noise in the wide blackness. "The light's gone out! Someone come and find me and help me!" For the moment his courage had failed altogether. Faintly the dwarves heard his small cries, though the only word they could catch was help. A little more comfortable here. "Now what on earth or under it has happened?" said Thorin. "Certainly not the dragon, or he would not go on squeaking." They waited a moment or two, and still there were no dragon noises, no sound at all, in fact, but Bilbo's distant voice. "Come, one of you get another light or two," Thorin ordered. "It seems we have got to go and help a burglar." "It is about our turn to help," said Balin. and I am quite willing to go. Anyway, I expect it's safe for the moment. Blowing lit several more torches, and then they all crept out one by one and went along the wall as hurriedly as they could. It was not long before they met Bilbo himself coming back towards them. His wits had quickly returned as soon as he saw the twinkle of their lights. "Only a bat and a dropped torch, nothing worse," he said in answer to their questions. Though they were much relieved, they were inclined to be grumpy at being frightened for nothing. But what they would have said if he had told them at that moment about the Arkenstone, I don't know. The mere fleeting glimpses of treasure which they had caught as they went along had rekindled all the fire in their dwarvish hearts, and when the heart of a dwarf, even the most respectable, is wakened by gold and by jewels, he grows suddenly bold, and he may become fierce. The dwarves, indeed, no longer needed any urging. All were now eager to explore the hall while they had the chance, and willing to believe that, for the present, Smaug was away from home. Each now gripped a lighted torch, and as they gazed first on one side then on the other, they forgot fear and even caution. They spoke aloud and cried out to one another, as they lifted old treasures from the mound or from the wall and held them in the light, caressing and fingering them. Fili and Kili were almost in a merry mood, and finding still hanging there many golden harps strung with silver, they took them and struck them, and being magical, and also untouched by the dragon, who had a small interest in music, they were still in tune. The hall was filled with a melody that had long been silent, but most of the dwarves were more practical. They gathered gems and stuffed their pockets, and let what they could not carry fall back through their fingers with a sigh. Thorin was not least among these, but always he searched from side to side for something which he could not find. It was the Arkenstone, but he spoke of it yet to no one. Now the dwarves took down mail and weapons from the walls and armed themselves. Royal indeed did Thorin look, clad in a coat of gold-plated rings, with a silver-hafted axe, and a belt crusted with scarlet stones. "Mr. Baggins," he cried, "here is the first payment of your reward. Cast off your old coat, and put on this!" With that he put on Bilbo a small coat of mail, brought for some young elf prince long ago. It was of silver steel, which the elves call mithril, and with it went a belt of pearls and crystals. A light helm of figured leather, strengthened beneath with hoops of steel, and studded about the brim with white gems, was set upon the hobbit's head. "I feel magnificent," he thought, "but I expect I look rather absurd. How they would laugh on the hill at home. Still I wish there was a looking-glass handy." All the same, Mr. Baggins kept his head more clear of the bewitchment of the hoard than the dwarves did. Long before the dwarves were tired of examining the treasures, he became wary of it and sat down on the floor, and he began to wonder nervously what the end of it all would be. "I would have give a good many of these precious goblets," he thought, "for a drink of something cheering out of one of Bjorn's wooden bowls. Thorin," he cried aloud, "what next? We are armed, but what good has any armor ever been before against Smaug the Dreadful? This treasure is not yet won back. We are not looking for gold yet, but for a way of escape, and we have tempted luck too long." "You speak the truth," answered Thorin, recovering his wits. "Let us go. I will guide you. Not in 1,000 years should I forget the ways of this place." Then he hailed the others, and they gathered together, and holding their torches above their heads, they passed through the gaping doors, not without many a backward glance of longing. Not too much. The dwarves have discovered that Smaug is not at home. Their glittering mail they had covered again with their old cloaks, and their bright helms with their tattered hoods, and one by one they walked behind Thorin. A line of little lights in the darkness that halted often, listening to fear once more for any rumor of the dragon's coming. Though all the old adornments were long mouldered or destroyed, and though all was befouled and blasted with the comings and goings of the monster, Thorin knew every passage and every turn. They climbed long stairs and turned west, and went down wide echoing ways, and turned again and climbed yet more stairs, and yet more stairs again. These were smooth, cut out of the living rock, broad and fair. And up the dwarves went, for they met no sign of any living thing, only furtive shadows that fled from the approach of their torches fluttering in the draughts. The steps were not made all the same for hobbit legs, and Bilbo was just feeling they could go on no longer when suddenly the roof sprang high and far beyond the reach of the torchlight. A white glimmer could be seen coming through some opening far above, and the air smelt sweeter. Before them, light came dimly through great doors that hung twisted on their hinges and half burnt. "This is the great chamber of Thror," said Thorin, "the hall of feasting and of council. Not far off now is the front gate." They passed through the ruined chamber. Tables were rotting there, chairs and benches were lying there overturned, charred and decaying. Skulls and bones were upon the floor, among flagstones and bowls and broken drinking horns and dust. They came through yet more doors at the further end. The sound of water fell upon their ears, and the grey light now grew suddenly more full. "There is the birthing of the running river," said Thorin. "From here it hastens to the gate. Let us follow it." Out of a dark opening in a wall of rock there issued a boiling water, and it flowed swirling down in a narrow channel, carved and made straight and deep by the cunning of ancient hands. Beside it ran a stone-paved road, wide enough for many men abreast. Swiftly along this they ran, and ran a wide sweeping turn, and behold, before them stood the broad light of day. In front there rose a tall arch, still showing the fragments of old carven work within, worn and splintered and blackened though it was. A misty sun set its pale light between the arms of the mountain, and beams of gold fell on the pavement of the threshold. A whirl of bats frightened them. A whirl of bats frightened from slumber by their smoking torches flurried over them. As they sprang forward, their feet slithered on stones, rubbed smooth and slimed by the passing of the dragon. Now before them the water fell noisily outward and foamed downwards toward the valley. They flung their pale torches to the ground and stood gazing out with dazzled eyes. They were come to the front gate, and were looking out upon the dale. "Well," said Bilbo, "I never expected to be looking out of this door, and I never expected to be so pleased to see the sun again, and to feel the wind on my face. But ow, this wind is cold." It was. A bitter easterly breeze blew with a threat of oncoming winter. It swirled over and around the arms of the mountain into the valley, and sighed among the rocks. After their long time in the stewing depths of the dragon-haunted caverns, they shivered in the sun. Suddenly Bilbo realized that he was not only tired, but also very hungry indeed. "It seems to be late morning," he said, "and so I suppose it is more or less breakfast time, if there is any breakfast to have. But I don't feel that Smaug's front doorstep is the safest place for a meal. Do let's go somewhere where we can sit quiet for a bit." "Quite right," said Balin. "And I think I know which way we should go. We ought to make for the old lookout post at the southwest corner of the mountain." "How far is that?" asked the Hobbit. 5 hours' march, I should think. It would be rough going. The road from the gate along the left edge of the stream seems all broken up. But look down there. The river loops suddenly east across the dale in front of the ruined town. At that point there was once a bridge, leading to steep stairs that climbed up the right bank, and so to a road running towards Raven Hill. There is, or was, a path that left the road and climbed up to the point. A hard climb, too, even if the old steps are still there. "Dear me," grumbled the Hobbit. "More walking and more climbing without breakfast. I wonder how many breakfasts and other meals we have missed inside that nasty, clockless, timeless hole." As a matter of fact, 2 nights and a day between had gone by. Excuse me. And not altogether without food, since the dragon smashed the magic door and Bilbo had quite lost count. And it might have been 1 night of a week, or a week of nights for all he could tell. "Come, come," said Thorin, laughing. His spirits had begun to rise again, and he rattled the precious stones in his pockets. "Don't call my place a nasty hole. You wait till it has been cleaned and redecorated." "That won't be until Smaug is dead," said Bilbo glumly. "In the meanwhile, where is he? I would give a good breakfast to know. I hope he is not up the mountain looking down at us." That idea disturbed the dwarves mightily, and they quickly decided that Bilbo and Balin were right. We must move away from here, said Dory. I feel as if his eyes were on the back of my head. It's a cold, lonesome place, said Bomba. There may be drink, but I see no sign of food. Dragon always be hungry in such parts. Come on, cried the others. Let us follow Balin's path. Under the rocky wall to the right there was no path, so on they trudged among the stones on the left side of the river. And the emptiness of the desolation soon sobered... Words are hard. And the emptiness and desolation soon sobered even Thorin again. The bridge that Balin had spoken of they found long fallen, and most of its stones were now only boulders in the shallow, noisy stream. But they forded the water without much difficulty and found the ancient steps and climbed the high bank. After going a short way they struck the old road, and before long came to a deep dell sheltered among the rocks. There they rested for a while and had such a breakfast as they could chiefly cram in water. If you want to know what cram is, I can only say that I don't know what the recipe, but it is biscuitish, keeps good indefinitely, is supposed to be sustaining, and is certainly not entertaining. Okay, I sat up again. Ugh. As soon as I sat back, I started yawning. Being, in fact, very uninteresting except as chewing exercise. It was made by the lake men for long journeys. After that they went on again, and now the road struck westwards and left the river, and the great shoulder of the south-pointing mountain spur drew ever nearer. At length they reached the hill path. It scrambled steeply up, and they plodded slowly one behind the other, till at last, in the late afternoon, they came to the top of the ridge and saw the wintry sun going downwards to the west. Here they found a flat place without a wall on three sides, but back to the north by a rocky face in which there was an opening like a door. From that door there was a wide view east and south and west. "Here," said Balin. "The old days we used to always keep watchmen. That door behind leads into a rock-hewn chamber that was made here as a guard-room. There were several places like it round the mountain, but there seemed small need for watching in the days of our prosperity, and guards were made over-comfortable perhaps. Otherwise, we might have had longer warnings of the coming of the dragon, and things might have been different. Still, here we can now lie hid and sheltered for a while, and can see much without being seen." "Not much use if we have been seen coming here," said Dory, who was always looking up towards the mountain's peak, as if he expected to see Smaug perched there like a bird on a steeple. "We must take our chance of that," said Thorin. "We can go no further today." "Here, here!" cried Bilbo, and flung himself on the ground. In the rock chamber there would have been room for 100, but there was a small chamber further in, more removed from the cold outside. It was quite deserted. Not even wild animals seemed to have used it in all the days of Smaug's dominion. There they laid their burdens, and some threw themselves down at once and slept, but the others sat near the outer door and discussed their plans. In all their talk, they came perpetually back to one thing. Where was Smaug? They looked west, and there was nothing, and east there was nothing, and in the south there was no sign of the dragon, but there was a gathering of very many birds. At that they gazed and wondered, but they were no nearer understanding it when the first cold stars came out. Pardon me. 'Tis late. You saw the Hobbit and got back as soon as you could. Well, I'm glad you made it, zombie. Oh, okay. Thus endeth Chapter 13. Let me see if I can pick out my breaking point before I go too far. Yeah. We'll go 2 more chapters, which is going to take us another 21 pages. And will leave us with chapters 16, 17, 18, and 19 tomorrow night, but they're relatively short. In any case, Chapter 14, Fire and Water. Now if you wish, like the dwarves, to hear the news of Smaug, you must go back again to the evening when he smashed the door and flew off in a rage 2 days before. The men of Lake Town, Esgaroth, were mostly indoors, for the breeze was from the black east and chill. But a few were walking on the quays and watching, as they were fond of doing, the stars shine out from the smooth patches of the lake as they opened in the sky. From their town, the lonely mountain was mostly screened by the low hills at the far end of the lake, though a gap in which the running river came down from the north. Only its high peak could they see in clear weather, and they looked seldom at it, for it was ominous and a drear even in the light of morning. Now it was lost and gone, blotted in the dark. Hey, Mikios, welcome. Appreciate the hot chocolate. Suddenly, it flickered back to view. A brief glow touched it and faded. "Look," said one, "the lights again. Last night the watchman saw them and started to fade from midnight until dawn. Something is happening up there." "Perhaps the king under the mountain is forging gold," said another. "It is long since he went north. It is time the songs began to prove themselves again." "Which king?" said another with a grim voice. "As like as not, 'tis the marauding fire of the dragon, the only king under the mountain we have ever known." "You are always foreboding gloomy things," said the others. "Anything from floods to poisoned fish. Think of something cheerful." Then suddenly a great light appeared in a low place in the hills, and the northern end of the lake turned golden. "The king beneath the mountain!" they shouted. "His wealth is like the sun, his silver like a fountain, his rivers golden run. The river is running gold from the mountain," they cried, and everywhere windows were opening and feet were hurrying. Oh shit. That's not in there. It's ad-lib. Could you imagine? Just oh shit. That'd be weird. Mr. Tolkien had a great deal more class than I did. Then, warning trumpets were suddenly sounded. And they sounded like me yawning. Which really, they didn't warn anybody. What are you gonna do? And echoed along the rocky shores. The cheering stopped and the joy was turned to dread. So it was that the dragon did not find them quite unprepared. Before long, so great was his speed, they could see him as a spark of fire rushing towards them and growing even huger and more bright, and not the most foolish doubted that the prophecies had gone rather wrong. Still, they had a little time. Every vessel in the town was filled with water, every warrior was armed, every arrow and dart was ready, and the bridge to the land was thrown down and destroyed before the roar of Smaug's terrible approach grew loud, and the lake rippled red as fire beneath the awful beating of his wings. Amid shrieks and wailing and the shouts of men, he came over them, swept towards the bridges, and was foiled. The bridge was gone, and his enemies were on the island in deep water, too deep and dark and cool for his liking. If he plunged into it, a vapor and steam would arise enough to cover all the land with mist for days. But the lake was mightier than he. It would quench him before he could pass through. Roaring, he swept back over the town. A hail of dark arrows leaped up and snapped and rattled on his scales and jewels, and their shafts fell back, kindled by his breath, burning and hissing into the lake. No fireworks you ever imagined equaled the sights of that night. At the twanging of bows and the shrilling of the trumpets, the dragon's wrath blazed to its height, till he was blind and mad with it. No one had dared to give battle to him for many an age, nor would they have dared now if it had not been for the grim-voiced man, Bard was his name, who ran to and fro, cheering on the archers and arguing or urging the master to order them to fight to the last arrow. Fire leaped from the dragon's jaws. He circled for a while high in the air above them, lighting all the lake. The trees by the shores shone like copper and like blood, with leaping shadows of dense black at their feet. Then down he swooped, straight through the arrow storm, reckless in his rage, taking no heed to turn his scaly sides toward his foes, seeking only to set their town ablaze. Fire leaped from thatched roofs and wooden beams, and he hurtled down and past and round again, though all had been drenched with water before he came. Once more water was flung by 100 hands wherever a spark appeared. Back swirled the dragon. A sweep of his tail and the roof of a great house crumbled and smashed down. Flames unquenchable sprang high into the night. Another swoop and another house, and then another sprang afire and fell, and still no arrow hindered Smaug or hurt him more than a fly from the marshes. Already, men were jumping into the water on every side. Women and children were being huddled into laden boats in the market pool. Weapons were flung down. There was a mourning and weeping, where but a little time ago the old songs of mirth had come to them, been sung about the dwarves. Now men cursed their names. The master himself was turning to his great gilded boat, hoping to row away in the confusion and save himself. Soon all the town would be deserted and burned down to the surface of the lake. That was the dragon's hope. They could all get into boats for all he cared. They could have been a fine sport hunting them, or they could stop till they starved. Let them try to get to land and he would be ready. Soon he would set all the shoreland woods ablaze and wither every field and pasture. Just now he was enjoying the sport of town baiting more than he had enjoyed anything for years. But there was still a company of archers that held their ground among the burning houses. Their captain was Bard, grim-voiced and grim-faced, whose friends had accused him of prophesizing floods and poisoned fish, though they knew his worth and courage. He was a descendant in a long line of Girion, Lord of Dale, whose wife and child had escaped down the running river from a ruin long ago. Now he shot with a great yew bow till all his arrows but one were spent. The flames were near him. His companions were leaving him. He bent his bow for the last time. Suddenly out of the dark something fluttered to his shoulder. He started, but it was only an old thrush. Unafraid it perched by his ear, and it brought him news. Marveling, he found he could understand its tongue, for he was of the race of Dale. "Wait, wait," it said to him. "The moon is rising. Look for the hollow of the left breast as he flies and turns above you." And while Bard paused in wonder, it told him of tidings up in the mountains and of all that he had heard. Then Bard drew his bowstring to his ear. The dragon was circling back, flying low, and as he came the moon rose above the eastern shore and silvered his great wings. "Arrow," said the bowman, "Black Arrow, I have saved you to the last. You have never failed me, and always I have recovered you. I had you from my father, and he from of old. If ever you came from the forges of the true king under the mountain, go now, and speed well." The dragon swooped once more, lower than ever, and as he turned and dived down, his belly glittered white with sparkling fires of gems in the moon, but not in one place. The great bow twanged. The black arrow sped straight from the string, straight for the hollow by the left breast, where the foreleg was flung wide. In it smote and vanished, barb, shaft, and feather, so fierce was its flight. With a shriek that deafened men, felled trees, and split stone, Smaug shot spouting into the air, turned over, and crashed down from on high in ruin. Full on the town he fell, his last throws splintered it in sparks and glades. The lake roared in, a vast steam leaped up, white in the sudden dark under the moon. There was a hiss, a gushing whirl, and then silence, and that was the end of Smaug and Esgaroth, but not of Bard. The waxing moon rose higher and higher, and the wind grew loud and cold. It twisted the white fog into bending pillars and hurrying clouds, and drove it off to the west, to scatter in the tattered shreds over the marshes before Mirkwood. Then the many boats could be seen dotted dark on the surface of the lake, and down the wind came to the voices of the people of Esgaroth lamenting their lost town and goods and ruined houses. But they had really so much to be thankful for, had they thought of it, though it could hardly be expected that they should just then. 3/4 of the people of the town had at least escaped alive. Their woods and fields and pastures and cattle and most of their boats remained undamaged, and the dragon was dead. What that meant, they had not yet realized. They gathered in mournful crowds upon the western shores, shivering in the cold wind, and their first complaints and anger were against the master who had left the town too soon, while some were still willing to defend it. "He may have a good head for business, especially his own business," some murmured, "but he is no good when anything serious happens. and they praised the courage of Bard and his last mighty shot. If only he had not been killed, they all said, we would make him a king. Bard the dragon shooter of the line of Girion, alas that he is lost. And in the very midst of their talk, a tall figure stepped from the shadows. He was drenched with water, his black hair hung wet over his face and shoulders, and a fierce light was in his eyes. Bard is not lost, he cried. He dived from Esgaroth when the enemy was slain. I am Bard of the line of Girion. I am the slayer of the dragon. King Bard! King Bard! They shouted, but the master ground his chattering teeth. Girion was lord of the Dale, not king of Esgaroth, he said. In the Lake Town we have always elected masters from among the old and wise, and have not endured the rule of mere fighting men. Let King Bard go back to his own kingdom. Dale is now freed by his valor, and nothing hinders his return. And any that wish can go with him if they prefer the cold shores under the shadow of the mountain to the green shores of the lake. The wise will stay here and hope to rebuild our town and enjoy again in time its peace and riches. We will have King Bard, the people near at hand shouted in reply. We have had enough of old men and the money counters. And people further off took up the cry. Up the bowmen, and down with the money bags, till the clamor echoed along the shore. I am the last man to undervalue Bard the bowman, said the master warily, for Bard now stood close beside him. He has tonight earned an eminent place in the roll of benefactors of our town, and he is worthy of many imperishable songs. But why, O people, and here the master rose to his feet and spoke very loud and clear, why do I get all your blame? For what fault am I to be deposed? Who aroused the dragon from his slumber, might I ask? Who obtained of us rich gifts and ample help, and led us to believe that old songs could come true? Who played on our soft hearts and our pleasant fancies? What sort of gold have they sent down from the river to reward us? Dragon fire and ruin. From whom should we claim recompense of our damage and aid for our widows and orphans? As you see, the master had got his position for nothing. The result of his words was that for the moment the people quite forgot their idea of a new king and turned their angry thoughts towards Thorin and his company. Wild and bitter words were shouted from many sides, and some of those who had before sung the old songs loudest were now heard as loudly crying that the dwarves had stirred the dragon up against them deliberately. Fools, said Bard, why waste words and wrath on those unhappy creatures? Doubtless they perished first in fire before Smaug came to us. Then, even as he was speaking, the thought came into his heart of the fabled treasure of the mountain lying without guard or owner, and he fell suddenly silent. He thought of the master's words and of Dale rebuilt and filled with golden bells, if he could but find the men. At length he spoke again. This is no time for angry words, master, or for considering weighty plans of change. There's work to do. I serve you still, though after a while I may think again of your words, and go north with any that will follow me. Then he strode off, to help the ordering of the camps, and in the care of the sick and wounded, but the master scowled at his back as he went, and remained sitting on the ground. He thought much, but said little, unless it was to call loudly for men to bring him fire and food. I wish somebody would bring me fire and food. That'd be awesome. I'd really go for a beer right now, to be honest with you. Now, everywhere Bard went, he found talk running like fire among the people concerning the vast treasure that was now unguarded. Men spoke of the recompense for all their harm that they would soon get from it, and wealth over and to spare, with which to buy rich things from the south, and it cheered them greatly in their plight. That was well, for the night was bitter and miserable. Shelters could be contrived for few. The master had one, and there was little food. Even the master went short. Many took ill of wet and cold and sorrow that night, and afterwards died, who had escaped uninjured from the ruin of their town, and in the days that followed there was much sickness and great hunger. Meanwhile Bard took the lead and ordered things as he wished, though always in the master's name, and he had a hard task to govern the people and direct the preparations for their protection and housing. Probably most of them would have perished in the winter that now hurried after autumn, if help had not been to hand. But help came swiftly. For Bard at once had sent speedy messengers up the river to the forest to ask for the aid of the King of Elves of the Wood, and these messengers had found a host already on the move, although it was then only the 3rd day after the fall of Smaug. The Elven King had received news from his own messenger, and from the birds that loved his folk, and already knew much of what had happened. Very great indeed was the commotion among all things with wings that dwelt on the borders of the desolation of the dragon. The air was filled with circling flocks, and their swift-flying messengers flew here and there across the sky. Above the borders of the forest there was whistling, crying, and piping. Far over Mirkwood tidings spread. "Smaug is dead!" Leaves rustled and startled ears were lifted. Even before the Elven King rode forth, the news had passed west, right to the pine woods of the Misty Mountains. Bjorn had heard it in his wooden house, and the goblins were at council in their caves. "That will be the last we shall hear of Thor and Oakenshield, I fear," said the king. "He would have done better to have remained my guest. It is an ill wind, all the same," he added, "that blows no one any good." For he too had not forgotten the legend of the wealth of Thror. So it was that Bard's messengers found him now marching with many spearmen and bowmen, and crows were gathered thick above him, for they thought that war was awakening again, such as had not been in those parts for a long age. But the king, when he received the prayers of Bard, had pity, for he was the lord of a good and kindly people. So turning his march, which had first been directed toward the mountain, he hastened now down the river to the long lake. He had not boats or rafts, even for his host, and they were forced to go the slower way by foot. But great store of goods he sent ahead by water. Still, elves are light-footed, and though they were not in these days much used to the marshes and the treacherous lands between forest and lake, their going was swift. Only 5 days after the death of the dragon, they came upon the shores and looked upon the ruins of the town. Their welcome was good, as may be expected, and the men and their master were ready to make any bargain for the future in return for the Elven King's aid. Their plans were soon made. With the women and the children, the old and the unfit, the master remained behind, and with him were some men of crafts and many skilled elves, and they busied themselves felling trees and collecting the timber sent down from the forest. Then they set about raising many huts by the shore against the oncoming winter. But also under the master's direction, they began the planning of a new town, designed more fair and large ever than before, but not in the same place. They removed northward, higher up the shore. Forever after, they had a dread of the water where the dragon lay. He would never again return to his golden bed, but was stretched cold as stone, twisted upon the floor of the shallows. There for ages his huge bones could be seen in calm weather, amid the ruined piles of the old town. But few dared to cross the cursed spot, and none dared to dive into the shivering water or recover the precious stones that fell for his rotting carcass. But all men of arms who were still able, and the host of the Elven King's array, got ready to march north to the mountain. It was thus that in elven days, from the ruin of the town, the head of their host passed the rock gates at the end of the lake, and came into the desolate lands. Thus ends chapter 14. And as I said before, we will continue to chapter 15, which will take us 10 more pages. Now we will return to Bilbo and the dwarves. All night one of them had watched, but when morning came they had not heard or seen any sign of danger, but ever more quickly the birds were regathering. The companies came flying from the south, and the crows that still lived about the mountain were wheeling and crying unceasingly above. "Something strange is happening," said Thorin. "The time has come for the autumn wanderings, and these are birds that dwell always in the land. There are starlings and flocks of finches, and far off there are many carrion birds, as if a battle were afoot." Suddenly Bilbo pointed. "There is that old thrush again," he cried. "He seems to have escaped when Smaug smashed the mountainside, but I don't suppose that snails have." Sure enough, the old thrush was there, and as Bilbo pointed, he flew towards them and perched on a stone nearby. Then he fluttered his wings and sang. Then he cocked his head to one side as if to listen, and again he sang. Again he listened. I believe he is trying to tell us something, but I cannot follow the speech of such birds. It is very quick and difficult. Can you make it out? Not very well, said Bilbo. As a matter of fact, he could make nothing of it all. But the old fellow seems very excited. I only wish he was a raven, said Balin. I thought you did not like them. You seemed very shy of them when we came this way before. Those were crows, and nasty suspicious-looking creatures at that, and rude as well. You must have heard the ugly names they were calling after us. The ravens are different. There used to be a great friendship between them and the people of Thror, and they often brought us secret news, and rewarded with bright things that they coveted to hide in their dwellings. They live many a year, and their memories are long, and they hand on their wisdom to their children. I knew many among the ravens of the rocks when I was a dwarf lad. This very height was once named Raven Hill, because there was a wise and famous pair, old Cock and his wife, that lived here above the guard chamber. But I don't suppose that any of the ancient breed linger there now. No sooner had he finished speaking than the old thrush gave a loud call and immediately flew away. We may not understand him, but that old bird understands us, I am sure, said Balin. Keep watch now and see what happens. Before long there was a fluttering of wings, and back came the thrush, and with him came a most decrepit old bird. He was getting blind, he could hardly fly, and the top of his head was bald. He was an aged raven of great size. He alighted stiffly on the ground before them, slowly flapped his wings, and bobbed towards Thorin. "Oh, Thorin, son of Thrain, and Balin, son of Fundin," he croaked, and Bilbo could understand what he said, for he used ordinary language and not bird speech. "I am Roak, son of Cock. Cock is dead, but he is well known to you. It is 100 years and 3 and 50 since I came out of the egg, but I do not forget what my father told me. Now I am chief of the great ravens of the mountain. We are few, but we remember still the king that was of old. Many of my people are abroad, for there are great tidings in the south. Some are tidings of joy to you, and some you will not think so good. Behold, the birds are gathering back again to the mountain and the dale from south and east and west. The word has gone out that Smaug is dead." "Dead! Dead!" shouted the dwarves. "Dead! And we have been in needless fear, and the treasure is ours." They all sprang up and began to caper about for joy. "Yes, dead," said Roak. "The thrush, may his feathers never fall, saw him die, and we may trust his words. He saw him fall in battle with the men of Esgaroth, the third night back from now at the rising of the moon." It was some time before Thorin could bring the dwarves to be silent and listen to the raven's news. At length, when he had told all the tale of the battle, he went on. "So much for joy." Excuse me. "So much for joy, Thorin Oakenshield. You may go back to your halls in safety. All the treasure is yours, for the moment. But many are the gathering why can't I read? But many are gathering hither beside the birds. The news of the death of the Guardian has already gone far and wide, and the legend of the wealth of Thror is not lost in the telling during many years. Many are eager for a share of the spoil. Already a host of the elves is on the way, and carrion birds are with them, hoping for battle and slaughter. By the lake men murmur that their sorrows are due to the dwarves. But they are homeless, and many have died, and Smaug has destroyed their town. They too think to find amends from your treasure, whether you are alive or dead. Your own wisdom must decide your course, but 13 is a small remnant of the great folk of Durin that once dwelt here, and now scattered far. If you will listen to my counsel, you will not trust the master of the lake men, but rather him that shot the dragon with his bow. Bard he is, of the race of Dale, of the line of Girion. He is a grim man, but true. We would see peace once more among dwarves and men and elves after the long desolation. But it may cost you dear in gold. I have spoken." Then Thorin burst forth in anger. "Ah, thanks, Roak. Cock's son, you and your people shall not be forgotten. But none of our gold shall thieves take, or the violent carry off while we are alive. If you would earn our thanks still more, bring us any news of that draw near. Also, I would beg of you, if any of you are still young and strong of wing, and you would send messengers to our kin in the mountains of the north, both west from here and east, and tell them of our plight, but go specially to my cousin Dane in the Iron Hills, for he has many people well armed and that dwells nearest to this place. Bid him hasten. I will not say if this counsel be good or bad, croaked Roak, but I will do what can be done. Then off he slowly flew. Back now to the mountain, cried Thorin. We have little time to lose. And little food to use, cried Bilbo, always practical on such points. In any case, he felt that the adventure was, properly speaking, over with the death of the dragon, in which he was much mistaken, and he would have given most of his share of the profits for the peaceful winding up of these affairs. Back to the mountains, cried the dwarves, as if they had not heard him, so back he had to go with them. As you have heard some of the events already, you will see that the dwarves still had some days before them. They explored the caverns once more and found, as they expected, that only the front gate remained open. All the other gates, except of course the small secret door, had long ago been broken and blocked by smog, and no sign of them remained. So now they began to labor hard in fortifying the main entrance, and in remaking the road that led from it. Tools were to be found in plenty that the miners and quarriers and builders of old had used, and at such work the dwarves were very, very skilled. As they worked, the ravens brought them constant tidings. In this way they learned that the Elven King had turned aside to the lake, and they still had a breathing space. Better still, they heard that 3 of their ponies had escaped and were running wild and far down the banks of the running river, not far from where the rest of their stores had been left. So while the others went on with their work, Feely and Keely were sent, guided by a raven, to find the ponies and bring back all they could. There were 4 days gone, and by that time they knew that the joined armies of the lake men and the elves were hurrying towards the mountain. But now their hopes were higher, for they had food for some weeks with care, chiefly cram, of course, and they were very tired of it. But cram is much better than nothing, and already the gate was blocked with a wall of squared stones laid dry, but very thick and high across the opening. There were holes in the wall through which they could see or shoot, but no entrance. They climbed in or out with ladders, and hauled stuff up with ropes. For the issuing of the stream, they had contrived a small low arch into the new wall. Near the entrance, they had so altered the narrow bed that a wide pool had stretched from the mountain wall to the head of the fall over which the stream went toward Dale. Approaching to the gate was now only possible without swimming, along a narrow ledge or cliff, to the right, as one looked outwards from the wall. The ponies they had brought only to the head of the steps above the old bridge, and unloading them there had bidden them return to their masters and sent them back riderless to the south. There came a sight when suddenly there were many lights as of fires and torches away to the south and Dale before them. "They have come!" cried Balin, "and their camp is very great. They must have come into the valley during the cover of dusk along both banks of the river." That night the dwarves slept little. The morning was still pale when they saw a company approaching. From behind their wall they watched them come up to the valley's head and climb slowly up. Before long they could see that both men of the lake, armed as if for war, and elvish bowmen were among them. At length the foremost of these climbed the tumbled rocks and appeared at the top of the falls. Very great was their surprise to see the pool before them and the gate blocked with a wall of new-hewn stone. As they stood pointing and speaking to one another, Thorin hailed them. "Who are you," he called in a very loud voice, "that come as if in war to the gates of Thorin son of Thrain, king under the mountain? And what do you desire?" But they answered nothing. Some turned swiftly back, and the others, after gazing for a while at the gate and its defenses, soon followed them. That day the camp was moved, and was brought right between the arms of the mountain. The rocks echoed then with voices and with song, as they had not done for many a day. There was the sound, too, of elven harps and of sweet music, and as it echoed up towards them, it seemed that the chill of the air was warm, and they caught faintly the fragrance of woodland flowers blossoming in spring. Then Bilbo longed to escape from the dark fortress and to go down and join in the mirth and feasting by the fires. Some of the young dwarves were moved in their hearts too, and they muttered that they wished things had fallen out otherwise, and that they might welcome such folk as friends. But Thorin scowled. Then the dwarves themselves brought forth harps and instruments, regained from the hoard, and made music to soften his mood, but their song was not as elvish song, and was much like the song they had sung long before in Bilbo's little hobbit hole. Under the mountain dark and tall, the king has come unto his hall. His foe is dead, the worm of dread, and ever so his foe shall fall. The sword is sharp, the spear is long, the arrow swift, the gate is strong. The heart is bold that looks on gold, the dwarves no more shall suffer wrong. The dwarves of yore made mighty spells, while hammers fell like ringing bells. In places deep, where dark things sleep, in hollow halls beneath the fell, on silver necklaces they strung the light of stars, on crowns they hung the dragon fire from twisted wire, the melody of harps they rung. The mountain throne once more is free, a wandering folk, the summons heed. Come haste across the waste, the king of friend and kin has need. Now call we over mountains cold, come back unto the caverns old. Here at the gates the king awaits, his hands are rich with gems and gold. I don't think they have tacos. The king is come unto his hall, under the mountain dark and tall. The worm of dread is slain and dead, and ever so our foes shall fall. The song appeared to please Thorin, and he smiled again and grew merry, and he began reckoning in the distance the Iron Hills, and how long it would be before Dane could reach the lonely mountain. If he had set out as soon as the message reached him. But Bilbo's heart fell, both at the song and the talk, and they sounded much too warlike. The next morning early, a company of spearmen was seen crossing the river and marching up the valley. They bore with them the green banner of the Elven King and the blue banner of the lake, and they advanced until they stood right before the wall at the gate. Again Thorin hailed them in a loud voice. Who are you that come armed for war to these gates of Thorin, son of Thrain, king under the mountain? This time he was answered. A tall man stood forward, dark of hair and grim of face, and he cried, Hail, Thorin! Why do you fence yourself like a robber in his hold? We are not yet foes, and we rejoice that you are alive beyond our hope. We came expecting to find none living here, and now that we are here, there is a matter for parley and a council. Who are you, and what would you parley? I am Bard, and by my hand was the dragon slain, and your treasure delivered. It is not a matter that concerns you. Moreover, I am by right descendant of the heir of Girion of Dale, and your hoard has mingled much of the wealth of his halls in town, which old Smaug stole. It is not that a matter of which we speak. Further, in his last battle, Smaug destroyed the dwellings of the men of Esgaroth, and I am yet the servant of their master. I would speak for him, and ask whether you have no thought for the sorrow and misery of his people. They aided you in your distress, and in recompense you have thus far brought ruin only, though doubtless undesigned. Now these were fair words and true, if proudly and grimly spoken, and Bilbo thought that Thorin would at once admit what justice was in them. He did not, of course, expect that anyone would remember that it was he who discovered all by himself the dragon's weak spot, and that was just as well, for no one ever did. But also, he did not reckon that the power that gold has upon which a dragon has long brooded, nor with dwarvish hearts. Long hours in the past days Thorin had spent in the treasury, and the lust of it was heavy on him. Though he had hunted chiefly for the Arkenstone, yet he had an eye for many other wonderful things that was lying there, about which were wound old memories of the labors and the sorrows of his race. You put your worst cause last and in the chief place, Thorin answered. To the treasure of my people no man has a claim, because Smaug, who stole it from us, also robbed him of life or home. The treasure was not his, that his evil deed should be amended with a share of it. The price of the goods and the assistance that we perceived of the lakemen will fairly pay, in due time, but nothing will we give, even a loaf's worth, under threat of force. While the armed host lies before our doors, we look on you as foes and thieves. It is in my mind to ask what share of their inheritance you would have paid to your kindred had you found the hoard unguarded and us slain. Just a question, replied Bard. But you are not dead, and we are not robbers. Moreover, the wealthy may have pity beyond right on the needy that befriended them when they were in want. This is very thick language. And still my other claims remain unanswered. I will not parley, as I have said, with armed men at my gate, nor at all with people of the Elven King, whom I remember with small kindness. In this debate they have no place. Begone now, ere our arrows fly. And if you would speak with me again, first dismiss the elvish host to the woods where it belongs, and then return, laying down your arms before you approach the threshold. The Elven King is my friend, and he has succored to the people of the lake in their need, though they had no claim but friendship on him. We will give you time to repent your words. Gather your wisdom, ere we return. Then he departed, and went back to the camp. Ere many hours were past, the banner-bearers returned, and trumpeters stood forth and blew a blast. In the name of Esgaroth and the forest, one cried, we speak unto Thorin Thrain's son Oakenshield, calling himself king under the mountain, and we bid him consider well the claims that have been urged, or be declared our foe. At the least he shall deliver 1/12 portion of the treasure unto Bard as the dragon slayer, and as the heir of Girion. From that portion Bard will himself contribute to the aid of Esgaroth. But if Thorin would have the friendship and honor of the lands about, as his sires had of old, then he will have also somewhat of his own for the comfort of the men of the lake. Then Thorin seized a bow of horn and shot an arrow at the speaker. It smote into his shield and stuck there, quivering. Since such is your answer, he called in return, I declare the mountain besieged. Oh, I don't know who's speaking. You shall not depart from it until you call on your side for a truce and a parley. We will bear no weapons against you, but we leave you to your gold. You may eat it if you will. With that the messenger departed swiftly, and the dwarves were left to consider their case. So grim had Thorin become, and even if they had wished, the others would not have dared to find fault with him. But indeed most of them seemed to share his mind, except perhaps old Fat Bomber, and Feely and Keely. Bilbo, of course, disapproved of the whole turn of affairs. He had by now had more than enough of the mountain, and being besieged inside, was not at all to his taste. "This whole place still stinks of dragon," he grumbled to himself. "It makes me sick, and cram is beginning simply to stick in my throat." Ladies and gentlemen, that is the end of Chapter 15 of The Hobbit. Tomorrow night we will conclude our last 34 pages. 37 pages. Beginning with Chapter 16, Thief in the Night. I'm tired, and my name is Joe. This has been Game Life Game. Yods, and reads The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien. I hope you've enjoyed Bioshock Infinite this evening, and if you've tuned in just for The Hobbit, I hope you've enjoyed that as well. In any case, we will continue tomorrow. My plan when I wake up is to play Bioshock Infinite for as long as I'm able. Possibly till the end of the game, and then to go from there. We will also finish The Hobbit beginning at 1 AM tomorrow. Perhaps earlier if we finish Bioshock earlier. But thank you for hanging out, Mikios. And yeah, we'll plow through the end of The Hobbit tomorrow night and the Battle of the Five Armies. Spoiler alert. But until then, thanks for hanging out. Enjoy your lives. And remember that life is what happens in between games, so take care of each other. Be good and kind to those around you. And I will see you next game. Good night.